Thank you for your time today, and thank you, Sarah Nam, for inviting myself and Dor to come and share our experiences. And I have also to adjust the microphone because South Sudanese, there are two versions, there's taller and there's short, so you got to together today. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional landowners of this beautiful land we are on today, the past and the present. In 2004, when I arrived in Australia, I was in an apartment in Fitzroy, in Brunswick Street in Melbourne, and I was just caught up staring at the ceiling all night, and a thought came to me, and that was to actually thank the UNHCR for their contribution in my life and in many refugees' lives. When that thought came to me, I thought perhaps I would write a letter. And indeed, I did. I've written a letter. Never thought, well, can't recall whether they actually received that letter or not. But I just wanted to say, this is a great opportunity for me today to say a big thank you to UNHCR for their contribution to many, many things that they have done, in particular refugees issues. To tell you what, the letters UNHCR were the first letters I've ever learned to recite, even way before I could learn an alphabet or anything. I learned how to recite the word UNHCR even way before I could write and spell my name. Growing up as in a camp without parents, what substitute the role of a parent is UNHCR? Probably you'd be thinking how, but the role of looking after you, the role of putting food on the table, although it wasn't enough, but they played a greater role in my life. So I guess Dora and I, we are the direct recipient of UNHCR speaking to you today. The best way for me to account to what UNHCR has done, I think, is by us telling our story, and I think Dora has captured most of that. And so for me, for it to be distinct today, by me telling your story, is for me to go a little bit and telling you of my experiences in Australia and what I'm doing next, rather than going back again. But I will very quickly run through my life story, which I will be able to tell you now. I have a very strong images of me growing up as a child, running around in a village, climbing trees and going hunting with my uncles and friends. One particular morning when I woke up, I could see the nervousness in my mother's face when she started to tell me, David, you need to be coming home early. I thought my mom was very jealous because I was having a good time. But in reality, the following morning, the reality was that when I woke up, as usual, wanted to go outside and play, I saw the corpses on the street and some of the houses were burned down. And that translated, and that made me think that, wow, that's the reality that my mom was telling me. Not to spend a lot of time outside again. My father came back. He hasn't been around so much, so he came back one morning. And he said, David, we have to go. He had to make a very difficult choice because at the time my mother was pregnant. And he was the only person who knew what we were going to go through. So my father stood there holding my one hand and my mother holding the other hand, and two were pulling me on both directions. My mother let go of my hand, and the last thing I saw of her was she was crying as we walked away. And because I was about 8 years old, I didn't have too many questions to ask my father. But then the journey, my life as a refugee, started immediately then. So we started to walk, and we joined a massive group of other people who were fleeing the same situation that we were running out of. And so eventually, the journey became a routine. Every day we walk, at night we walk, and we're exposed to all sorts of dangers that Dora was mentioned earlier. Wild animals, we had to feed on wild fruits and all sorts of everything. And I had one question every day, Dad, when are we arriving? And my father would give me the same answer, we'll be there tomorrow. And when tomorrow comes, I ask the same question. And I think he got sick and tired of me asking the same question, and honestly I got sick and tired of receiving the same answers. So at the end, I think to do good for us, I think I ended up not asking more questions anymore, and so the journey continued. 3 months later, we arrived in Ethiopia, in Panido camp, where Dora and I were together in that camp as well. So here we are. We arrived and we were shown a very big space, and we were told, this is your home. Now, where do we start? So we started cutting down bushes. We started to build our temporary shelters. I was very lucky during the journey because my father was there. My father would hold my hand. My father would be there to help me. But there were so many children and unaccompanied minors that didn't make it because no one was looking after them. When we arrived in Ethiopia, the likes of my father were pulled aside. And people of my age were taken aside. And that's how our life started. Now, living in the camp for 4 years, we were promised all sorts of things in the camp. First of all, we were told there would be plenty of food, there would be education and all that. For the first 6 months or a year, we didn't see any of those. There was just us struggling, trying to find something to eat. And there was a huge cholera outbreak in the camp where a lot of people actually died. And so for us, the only work we would do when you are 8 or 9 years old is to wake up in the morning, drag outside your friends and go and bury them. We're exposed to that. Eventually, UNHCR arrived, and our life changed. At least we would have something to eat a day. 4 years later, we were kicked back to South Sudan, where we started another journey, and we ended up in Kakuma refugee camp, just as Doris mentioned. But one thing that changed my life was when we were at the border at the town called Lokichokyo, just before we actually were admitted into Kenya. Because I grew up with that experience of violence, for me, what I substituted my life most was for me to have a gun. And so not many people actually knew, but I had my gun hidden in the bag, a pistol. And so when we were entering, they had to do a search. And this Kenyan police guy came and said, where are you going with this? And because I didn't know English much by that time, I just kept quiet. And he took away the gun, and I felt empty. I felt that what was protecting me all this time is taken away from me. But the life has to go on. So we eventually started Kakuma refugee camp, and I kept waiting there. For about 13 years I was in the camp, just waiting every day. The life became so boring, and again, while in the camp, you have to find what you do best. And for me, it was playing soccer, and I had to play every day until in 2004, I was very lucky that one moment that any refugee in the world waits for, and that is when you are told that you're going to be resettled somewhere else. So in 2004, August, I eventually landed in Melbourne. That became my new home. Now, I started my story earlier on about staring on the ceilings. That is, staring on the ceiling at night wasn't once, wasn't twice. It was almost every day. Because I found myself in a position where I don't know what to do with myself. I find myself, the memories of the past are starting to come back. I find myself in a position where I wanted to feel like I'm a human being again, but I've forgotten that I'm a human being. I wanted to live again. All the opportunities that has been presented to me, and for me it was just to take them. And I was struggling to do that. And that's why I was staring at the ceiling every day, and that's how I remembered, oh gosh, I need to thank the UNHCR for the good work they have done to bring me up to this point. Kakuma refugee camp was largely run by UNHCR for their support. And so for me, while I was in Australia, I had a lot of questions, and I wanted the moment that I wanted to change my life. And eventually I decided that I will have to move forward. You try to move on to be like anybody else. But again, you know that our society, not everybody is very welcoming as you are today, I would guess. That, you know, we face a lot of discrimination, we face a lot of issues on the street. And one of the biggest moments for me was in 2007 when one of our colleagues story in Australia, that when he was killed. And the stories in the media got out so badly that I got so angry, and I felt that I would be much even happier in the camp than being in Australia. That was the first time ever I regretted to come to Australia, because I felt it would be even better living in the camp. Now, what do I do about it? That's my life started then. One day I confronted Kevin Andrews then, who is the migration minister in Melbourne and Colony Street, because someone told me he was having a meeting. And for me, I thought, what do I do? So I painted my face with white zinc, and I had a Vegemite sandwich in my hand. And I went to him and I said, sir, what do you mean by integration or assimilation? Because what was being said then was that we African, we can't integrate, or in particular South Sudanese. So painting and get him to talk to me. And he looked at me and he just brushed me aside. And that, my journey to advocate on behalf of refugees, on behalf of people who rather would not say things, started then. And that's how my life has spent it out, seen through. I worked for one of the organizations called Brotherhood of St. Lawrence in Melbourne for the last 6 years. And about 6 months ago, I decided to actually quit my job. And that, I've called that part, or the section where I'm taking you to now, is called David's Time to Give Back. Because I've been so lucky that in my life, a lot of people have helped me through. And so for me, it's time for me to give back. And so I wanted to help people settle down here. I wanted to help people back in my village. And eventually, I was able to, I started an organization called Peace Palette. And that is to look at how aid have an impact on people back, how aid had an impact on me. And to me, it's moving towards that issue of aid moving away from emergency services or emergency relief support to empowerment, to capacity building, to self-reliance, to independent, for people to become independent. Believe it or not, a lot of countries or communities in Africa are becoming very dependent of this aid, and that's what I wanted to do, to actually to say, hang on a second, it's not about receiving all the aid, because we have been at the receiving end all the time. And so for me, it's about us moving away from that step, and that's how I dedicated the rest of my stay in Australia to try to move towards that, try to move people to become very independent. I just got back last week from my village after 2 months to conduct community consultation and tell them what we need to do. And one interesting thing was that there are skills in the village. There are skills, but they don't see it. And with my facilitation, I was able to bring those skills out and to be able to work as a community. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to the last part of my speech. You really don't know what you are here for. I think you never even thought about it. You know, this is what is called passing on the baton. Something is being passed on to you. By the end of these 2 days, what are we trying to get at? Or hopefully what I'm imagining trying to get at with all of you is that you will be pumped up with all the ideas. You will be inspired. Hopefully you will be inspired. And then you go out there and keep the flame burning. So for me, I would like to encourage you and say, let's go make a difference. Thank you.